This is the pattern. All seam allowances are included. I use cotton fabric, thin for the lining, thick for the bag, and the one with pattern for the lid, and I use fusible interfacing. The lid cuts in one layer of fabric, so you get one for the outer fabric and one for the lining and one for the interfacing. When I cut the pieces for the bag, the fabric is double, so I get 2 from the outer fabric, 2 for the lining, and 2 from the interfacing. When you fuse the interfacing, you make sure that you have the glue to the wrong side of the fabric, and I always protect my iron by using a pattern paper in between. And then I fuse according to the instructions. Now I have interfacing on these pieces, so now I lay them right sides together and I sew the side, the bottom and the side. I use straight stitch and 1 centimeter seam allowance. It's good if you can separate the seam allowance when you press it with a little ironing board, and as well as I can I try to press them apart. If you haven't got one small one, you can try as well as you can to do it on a regular board. Sew the corners right sides together and the seams should be parallel, and you use 1 centimeter seam allowance and a straight stitch. When I sew the lining I do it in the same way, but I leave an opening in the bottom about 8 centimeters wide. The corners I do in the same way as before. Lay the lid right sides together with the lining and pin these sides and sew it with 1 centimeter and with a straight stitch. On these curved corners I cut away small pieces and I alter any excess of the seam allowance, and then I turn the right sides out. When you press it, you should make sure that the lining doesn't show. Sew a top stitch as well on these sides. It's easier to sew this curved piece when you have the needle in the lowered position, so you can easily and slowly sew around the corner. Make a small notch in the seam allowance in the middle of the lid. Find the middle also on the bag pieces, on the top edge, also on the lining. Put the lid inside of the bag, right sides together, and the notches should match up, and pin it. Now I'm going to cut the shoulder strap. The fabric is double and I pin it on the fold. I need 2 of these pieces, so I cut it 1 more time. Lay them right sides together and pin both of the long sides. When I sew these seams I use a straight stitch and 1 centimeter seam allowance. In the middle of the strap on one side I leave an opening of about 8 centimeters. Try to press the seam allowances apart. Now I fasten a large safety pin to one on the shorter ends, and through the opening I pass it through all the way to the middle. So you turn the right sides out through the opening in the middle. Press the shoulder strap and make top stitches. Make a notch where the center of the short end of the strap is, and you should put that notch parallel to the seam, right sides together, and make sure that the strap isn't twisted, and you pin it in place. Turn the right side out on the lining and you pin it right sides together with the bag, seam to seam, edge to edge. Sew around with a straight stitch and 1 centimeter seam allowance. Through the opening in the lining you turn everything right sides out. Sew the opening shut with the straight stitch. Press and pin this seam, make sure that the lining isn't showing, and then you top stitch all the way around, even round here where the strap and the lid are. So it's good if you have pinned it. And when you have done the top stitch, you are finished.